The night Berta Szymanski stepped between a man's fist and a 12-year-old boy. She didn't think about what might happen to her. She only thought about the boy's face, the way his eyes had gone completely still, the way children go still when they've learned that flinching makes it worse. She didn't know whose son he was. She found out 30 seconds later. Berta had been working the Callaway Grand for 11 months by then. Not the front of the house, where the crystal chandeliers threw light across white tablecloths and women arrived in gowns that cost more than her mother's car. She worked the service corridor, the invisible maze behind the walls where the real work happened. Hauling linen carts, restocking the dessert station, moving through the hotel's bones like water through pipes, unseen and necessary. She was 26 years old, 5'4", and 270 pounds of solid Midwestern stubbornness. She had her grandmother's dark eyes, her father's thick wrists, and a temper she kept locked so far down it only surfaced about twice a year. She wore her brown hair pulled back so tight it gave her a slight headache by the end of every shift, because loose hair was a violation of the grooming code, and Berta needed this job. She needed it badly enough that she'd been swallowing indignities for 11 months without complaint. The banquet coordinator called her the freight elevator behind her back, which she knew because hotel walls are thin, and people assume the help can't hear. The assistant floor manager had once handed her a tray of champagne flutes and said, "Try not to break anything, sweetheart," the way you'd say it to someone you were certain would. A guest had once blocked her cart in the corridor, looked her up and down, and said she should really look into gastric surgery, then walked away like he'd done her a favor. She'd swallowed all of it. Because rent in this city didn't pay itself and her mother's dialysis didn't either, but that was the old math. The math she'd been running for 11 months. The night of the Aldano event, she ran different numbers. The Aldano group had booked the entire fourth-floor ballroom for what was billed as a private anniversary gala. Berta had seen the setup, the imported flowers, the live quartet, the security detail standing at intervals like sculptures. She'd seen the guest list by accident when a paper slipped off the banquet coordinator's desk, and she'd picked it up to hand back. She'd recognized one name from the news, then another, then stopped reading, because there are things it's healthier not to know too much about. The Aldano Group was not, strictly speaking, just a hospitality and real estate conglomerate. Everyone in the city knew this the way they knew the sky was gray in February, not officially, not on record, just as a fact of the landscape. Berta's job that night was the service corridor on the fourth floor. Keep the secondary bar stocked, collect used linens from the staging area. Do not enter the ballroom unless specifically directed by the event coordinator, the usual invisible woman work. She was transferring a rack of clean glasses from the freight elevator to the staging alcove at 9:47 p.m. when she heard the boy. She didn't hear words at first. She heard tone, the specific acoustic signature of someone trying to make themselves small, inside a conversation that was happening to them, rather than with them. She'd made that sound herself enough times to recognize it. She set the rack down against the wall. The alcove opened onto a short side corridor that branched off toward the private restrooms. Berta rounded the corner slowly, because she'd learned that moving too quickly in a uniform makes security nervous. There was a man in a tuxedo, tall, silver-haired, the kind of tan that came from actual sunlight rather than beds. He had the boy by the collar, not violently, not yet, but with the grip of someone who had decided that physical contact was a reasonable punctuation mark for whatever point he was making. The boy was maybe 12, slight, dark-haired. His tuxedo jacket was too big through the shoulders, like he'd borrowed it or been bought it recently and not yet grown into it. His face was doing that thing Berta recognized, the absolute stillness. The man's free hand was raised, not swinging, not yet, but raised. Berta didn't make a decision exactly. Decision implies a pause. There was no pause. She stepped between them, She wasn't graceful about it. She was carrying a clean bar towel over one shoulder, and her service keycard was clipped to her lapel, and she smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and champagne spillage, and she put her body into that corridor, with all 270 pounds of it, and said, "Excuse me." The man's arm came down, not because she'd stopped it, because the interruption broke his momentum. He stared at her. "The restrooms are occupied," she said. "There's a backup situation. I need everyone to clear this corridor for sanitation." She looked at the boy. "That includes you, honey. Come on." The man's expression did something complicated. He was processing too many variables at once. Who she was, what she'd seen, whether she was a threat, whether the scene he'd been staging was now witnessed. His hand released the boy's collar. The boy looked at Berta. She gave him the smallest possible nod. He walked past her toward the ballroom. The man smoothed his jacket lapels and said nothing. His eyes tracked Berta for 3 full seconds before he turned and walked back toward the event. Berta stood in the corridor for a moment, her heart doing something loud and unhelpful in her chest, and then she went back to her glasses rack. She thought, probably nothing, probably fine. She thought, I don't know whose boy that was, and then she found out. His name was Luca. She learned this 12 minutes later, when the corridor behind her erupted into activity. 2 men in earpieces, the hotel's head of security, and a man who walked through the center of all of it, like the other men were weather. He was somewhere in his early 40s, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had been arranged by genetics and experience into something that didn't show much. Dark suit, no tie, a jaw that looked like it had been built to absorb impact. He moved quietly for someone his size, which Berta noticed because quiet movers were either very confident or very dangerous, and this man had the particular stillness of someone who was both. He was talking to his security in a low voice. Then the boy, Luca, said something, and the man's eyes came across the corridor and landed on Berta. She had the irrational impulse to straighten her posture. He came over to her. His men stayed back, which told her something about the kind of authority this person operated with, the kind that didn't need proximity to enforce itself. "You're the one who intervened," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I needed the corridor cleared," Berta said. "Sanitation issue." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. "There's no sanitation issue." "No," she agreed. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. She had the sense that he was a man accustomed to people looking away first, and she was tired enough to not care about that particular dynamic. "His name is Luca," the man said. "He's my nephew. The man you interrupted is my Uncle Rainer. They have a—" He paused, chose his words, "a history." "I didn't see anything," Berta said. "I needed the corridor cleared. You're sticking to that. It's true enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's your name?" She almost didn't answer. But she had a name tag, and he was clearly the kind of person who could find things out, and there was no profit in being evasive with people like that. "Berta," she said. "Berta Szymanski." Szymanski. He said it correctly, the SG soft and sibilant, which almost nobody did. "Polish, my grandparents. I'm from Ohio." Another moment of quiet. Then he said, "Thank you, Berta Szymanski," and walked back to his men. She stood there for a moment with the glasses rack. Then she finished her shift. She did not expect to see him again. This was, it turned out, a significant miscalculation. His name was Luca Aldano. She found this out 4 days later, when she was called into her manager's office and told that the Aldano group had made an unusual request. They were looking for additional household staff for a private residence. Temporary placement, 60 days, substantially above her current rate, and they had specifically requested Berta Szymanski. Her manager looked at her with an expression caught between suspicion and impressed. Berta sat with the information for a moment. The sensible thing, the safe thing, was to decline. You didn't take private placements with families you'd seen in the middle of something you weren't meant to see. You kept your distance. You stayed invisible. But Her mother's next dialysis cycle cost $1,100 out of pocket, and the rate they were offering was more than she made in 2 weeks. She said yes. The Aldano house was in the old part of the city, the neighborhood where the streets were still cobblestoned for 3 blocks, and the homes stood behind iron fences that predated the modern security systems concealed within them. It was a limestone townhouse with 5 floors and a garden at the back that someone tended with serious attention. There were other staff, a housekeeper who ran the place with the quiet efficiency of a general, a cook who treated his kitchen as sovereign territory, 2 men who drifted around the perimeter and were definitely not gardeners. Berta's official role was household assistant. In practice, this meant whatever was needed: laundering, logistics, helping with the old woman on the 3rd floor. The old woman was named Maid Aldano. She was 81 years old, Cato's grandmother, and she was navigating the middle stages of dementia with a particular kind of fierce dignity that Berta recognized from her own family. Maid had good hours and bad hours. In her good hours, she was sharp and funny, and told stories about post-war Budapest that were completely riveting. In her bad hours, she was somewhere else entirely, not frightened, just absent, like a house where all the lights had been moved to a different floor. No one in the household quite knew what to do with her during the bad hours. The housekeeper was efficient but not warm. The cook didn't have time. The men on the perimeter certainly weren't equipped for it. Berta, who had sat with her own mother through years of medical difficulty, knew exactly what to do. She just sat with her. She made tea. She didn't correct her when she talked about people who were gone as if they were still there. She kept her voice even and her presence calm. On Margit's bad days, she learned you didn't try to anchor her to the present. You just accompanied her wherever she was. Cato watched this. Berta noticed him noticing, which she wasn't sure she was meant to. She had been there 11 days when Reina Aldano came to the house. She knew who he was before he was introduced. The silver-haired man from the hotel corridor, the one with his arm raised. He arrived for a family dinner on a Tuesday and moved through the house with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years being comfortable in rooms where other people were not. He clocked Berta immediately. She saw it, the slight pause, the reassessment, the decision made to behave as though he didn't recognize her. She made the same decision. Dinner was in the formal dining room on the 2nd floor. Berta wasn't serving. That was Orla, the younger household assistant. But Berta was in the corridor outside managing a linen situation when the raised voices started. She wasn't trying to listen. The walls of old houses carry sound, and Reina's voice was the kind that traveled. Don't know why you brought some stranger into the house, Cato. After what happened, this isn't a conversation for the dinner table. She was there, she saw, she handled it discreetly. That's exactly the quality I want in someone who works here. You don't know anything about her, where she comes from, who she talks to. I know everything about her. A pause. That's also my job. Berta set down the linen. She stood very still in the corridor. She had assumed he'd done a basic background check. Everyone with serious money did that when hiring household staff. She had not considered the depth at which someone like Cato Aldano might define knowing everything. A chill moved through her that was not entirely unpleasant. 3 things happened over the following week that she filed away without examining too closely. The first, Cato stopped pretending not to watch her with his grandmother. He started doing it openly, leaning against the doorframe on the 3rd floor while Margit talked and Berta listened, his arms crossed, his face doing the thing it did. The thing where it didn't show much, but the attention was total. The second, Luca appeared, the boy from the corridor. He came to the house on a Thursday after school, dropped off by a driver, and made his way directly to the 3rd floor where Margit was. He sat with her, with the practiced ease of a child who had done this many times, the 2 of them in parallel. The old woman drifting, and the boy grounding her with the specific gentleness of someone who understood loss in the particular way that children raised around it sometimes do. Berta watched this from the doorway without interrupting. After about 20 minutes, Luca looked up and saw her. He nodded. She nodded back. That was the whole of it, but it landed somewhere it didn't leave. The third thing, she found the photographs. She wasn't snooping. She was dusting the third-floor study, one of her actual job requirements, and a framed picture on the desk caught her eye. A younger Cato, maybe early 30s, standing with a woman and a small boy. The woman was laughing. She had the same dark eyes as Luca. She asked Orla about it later carefully, in the way you ask about things you've picked up incidentally. Orla told her. Luca's mother, Cato's younger sister Vera, had died 4 years ago. An accident. Luca had come to live with Cato after that. Raina, the uncle, had contested the arrangement. The two sides of the family had been in some version of war about it since. And Raina, Berta said. Is he around often? Orla gave her a look that communicated an entire paragraph. Not when Mr. Aldano can help it. She should have left it there. She should have kept doing her job, managing Margit's difficult hours, maintaining the laundry logistics, staying invisible, and she should have let the family dynamics remain exactly that. Family, their problem, not hers. But 2.5 weeks into her placement, Berta overheard something she was absolutely not meant to hear. She had come upstairs to leave clean towels outside the study. A routine so established she'd stopped thinking about it. The study door was slightly open. 2 voices inside, Cato's and another she didn't immediately recognize. What she understood from 6.5 minutes of standing in the corridor with a stack of towels pressed to her chest, Raina had obtained some documentation, or claimed to have, something that would complicate Cato's guardianship of Luca. The other man, a lawyer, she thought, from the cadence of how he spoke, was advising that it needed to be addressed before a scheduled court date. There was a name mentioned, a woman who might testify, a payment that had changed hands, and then the grandmother's condition could be relevant. If she can be presented as, "Don't," Cato said, very quiet. Not loud the way dangerous things sometimes are. Just quiet. The other man stopped talking. Berta moved away from the door. She went down the hall. She set the towels in the correct location and went back to her work. She sat with it for 48 hours. Then she went to find the housekeeper. Her name was Prue. She had worked for the Aldano family for 19 years, and she had the specific quality of someone who had watched a great deal and decided that most of what she saw was not her business, and had survived this long by maintaining that principle with great discipline. Berta explained what she'd heard. Not all of it, only the part about Margit. Prue listened with her arms folded and her eyes steady. If someone is planning to use her medical situation in a legal proceeding, Berta said, there are records that could be relevant. Her good hours, her current functioning. If there's a neurologist involved, there is, Prue said. Has Mr. Aldano documented her good hours? I mean formally, video, notes with timestamps. If someone plans to argue she can't function, the opposite record exists. I've been with her. I know what she can do. Prue looked at her for a long moment. You understand, Prue said slowly, that the situation in this household is more complicated than household work. I've been here almost 3 weeks, Berta said. I'm not unaware of that. And you're still raising this. She's 81 and she has dementia, and someone is talking about using her as leverage. Yes, I'm still raising this. Prue was quiet for 10 seconds. Then she said, I'll speak with Mr. Aldano. He came to find Berta the next morning. She was in the garden, moving flower pots to make way for some repair work, which was not technically her job, but which she'd offered to help with, because the gardener had a bad back, and she had 2 functional arms. She was sweating, and her hair had given up on its bun, and she looked, she was fairly certain, completely terrible. He came through the garden door and stood on the flagstone path and said her name. She straightened up. He looked at her for a moment, the way he did, that total attention in a face that didn't particularly move. "Prue told me what you said," he said. "I know I overstepped. You didn't." He paused. "I want to understand what you heard," she told him. All of it this time. She was precise about what she was certain of and clear about what she'd inferred, because she had the sense that imprecision would cost her more with this man than staying silent. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "How long have you been listening to things you weren't meant to hear?" "I haven't been listening. Sounds travel in this house." "Sounds travel," he repeated. Something almost warm moved across his face. "You're very careful with your language." "I'm careful with most things." He stood there on the flagstone path for another moment, looking at her with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. "Why?" he said. "Why what? Why raise it? Why not stay out of it? You don't know these people." Berta thought about Margit's face on a bad morning, the way she'd surface from wherever she'd been, and look around the room with a kind of quiet bravery that Berta found almost impossible to witness without feeling something break open in her chest. "Someone was going to use her condition to hurt someone she loves," Berta said. "I didn't think that was acceptable. Most people would have thought it wasn't their problem. Most people are wrong about what's their problem." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before. Cato looked at her, and she looked back at him, and something in the garden was very still, the way gardens sometimes go still in the morning before everything starts up again. "The neurologist comes on Friday," he said. "I'd like you there, with her. She does better when you're there." "Okay," Berta said. He nodded. He started to turn. "Mr. Aldano," she said. He looked back. "The woman who's going to testify. The one Raina paid." She paused. "I don't know if there's anything to be done about that. But if you need someone to sit with Margit through whatever's coming, through the court date, through all of it, I'm not going anywhere." She hadn't planned to say that. She wasn't entirely sure what it cost her. He held her gaze for a long moment. "Your placement was 60 days, he said. "I know. I'd like to extend it." "I know that too," she said. "I'm agreeing." The court date came 19 days later. Raina's documentation turned out to be a set of financial records that had been partially altered. Something that emerged, after considerable legal effort, from the original files that Cato's attorneys had obtained through channels Berta didn't ask about and didn't want to know. The woman Raina had paid to testify withdrew her statement 2 days before the hearing for reasons that were described to Berta only as she reconsidered. Berta had been present for the neurologist's assessment of Margit. She'd sat with the old woman through the evaluation, keeping her calm, and afterward the doctor had noted in her file that Mrs. Aldano demonstrated meaningful cognitive and communicative capacity in supported environments, and that her presentation was substantially better than baseline when in the presence of familiar, reassuring personnel. The language was clinical. What it meant was, Margit did better with Berta there. That documentation had been entered into the legal record. Luca kept his home. The night after the hearing, Berta was in the kitchen late, which she often was. There was something about the Aldano kitchen at night, the way it held the warmth of the day's cooking, that she found genuinely calming. She was heating water for tea and not thinking about very much when Cato came in. He didn't say anything at first. He went to the refrigerator, looked into it with the expression of a man who was not actually hungry, and closed it again. "He's going to fight it," he said. "Raina, it won't stop. I know. He has reach, resources." He leaned against the counter. "This family has enemies, Berta, not the kind you make by being disagreeable at dinner. The actual kind, I've gathered that." He looked at her. "You're still here. I said I wasn't going anywhere. People say things I don't usually." He was quiet for a moment. The kettle started to hiss. "Luca asked about you today," he said. "He wanted to know if you were staying." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know." She poured the water into her mug. She thought about her mother in Ohio, about dialysis cycles and rent that didn't pay itself, about 11 months of swallowing indignities in a hotel service corridor for a rate that barely kept her level. She thought about Margit, on a good morning, sharp and funny, telling stories about Budapest. She thought about a boy with his mother's eyes going still in a hotel corridor because he'd learned that flinching made it worse. She thought about a man who said her name correctly. First time, without being told. "Tell him I'm staying," she said. Cato looked at her for a long moment, that full, quiet attention. Then something shifted in his face. "Not much. Enough." "Okay," he said. He stayed in the kitchen. She made her tea. Outside the window, the old city moved through its night in its usual way, alive and complicated and indifferent to any of them, and in the kitchen there was warmth and the sound of a kettle cooling, and two people sitting with the particular understanding that some things don't need to be said out loud to be completely, irreversibly true.